You know, there's a question I think is greatly unspoken a lot of times in today's society, at least whenever it comes to the music that we listen to. Here in 2013 especially. Maybe this is something that has been asked throughout every generation. However, it's one that we definitely see a lot more often now that social media has given us more ways for us to communicate our thoughts and kind of get out there what's on our minds. And one thing that a lot of people wonder, especially those users that may not be of the teenage discrimination, those users that might be closer to my age or maybe above, those users that also may not necessarily be parents of children or things like that, and that's why does it seem that people these days seem to gravitate to a certain type of music, especially whenever there are other styles out there that had supposedly their moment in the sun, their moment of glory, and it felt like they were never going to die or fade, and they still are considered classic or immortal works of music. Why did that seem to fade away to something that seems, at least these days perhaps to the opinions of many individuals, as substandard? Either that or cookie cutter, cut and paste, something that's extremely plastic. Plastic music is a word that has been used on this channel quite frequently. And if you're new, if this is the first time you've ever witnessed a Cover Killer Nation video, let me give you some credentials of mine. That way you can understand why I feel as though I am justified in making this video, and why I feel that my opinion does matter in this regard, and has a little bit of weight. I've been listening to music for damn near all of my life. I'm 29 years old as of this recording, and I can remember listening to music as early as 4 and 5. I've listened to everything from oldies from the 1950s and 60s all the way up to the present music, whether it be heavy metal, whether it be rock, whether it be independent, whether it be rap of the underground or the mainstream persuasion. I've listened to some opera, I've attended some operas, I like jazz, I like blues. Basically, I can find just about a little bit of anything from every genre that I can kind of dig, with very, very few lone exceptions. I've also worked at a music store for about 5 years. I've been really studying the idea of music and the way in which it's kind of evolved or devolved, depending on your opinion, for easily the past decade, and I have been kind of on this whole reviewing idea, or at least kind of honing my skills and talking about music and kind of determining what albums are better than others, or whatever you may want to call it, for definitely the better part of a decade, because my best friend and I started doing this the minute that we got into metal in the first part of the 2000s. So, while those credentials may not be very, high accolades, I might not be writing for Rolling Stone or anything like that, I still feel that I am qualified to talk about this a little bit. So what are some reasons why people tend to gravitate to the music that's out there today, as opposed to what we perhaps have seen in yesteryears? Why don't they gravitate toward the classic rock a lot more? I mean, there's still a big grouping of individuals that does. They still seem to live in that past glory of classic rock. But let's talk mostly about what's current. Why is it that people tend to gravitate more towards rap? Why is it that more people tend to gravitate towards country? And I think more specifically, we're going to talk about why people really go toward this mainstream pop idea. And the mainstream pop idea is going to be kind of the main point of this whole thing. So I'm going to tackle the first two very, very quickly, first of all. And really, whenever it comes to rap, I think this is something that does really embody a lot of angst, not to mention it does have a certain appeal to it. I mean, I understand that there are that we've not exactly been in the era where rap has kind of a chip on its shoulder for a while. It has been selling very, very well now for the better part of the past decade, and really the past 2 decades. Ever since the evolution of NWA, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre with The Chronic, Tupac, of course, rising to his immortality, the Notorious B.I.G., just to name a few of the big heavyweights, and then moving on to people such as Eminem, Fabulous, Ludacris, now currently Pitbull. There is one thing that I will say, there's definitely been an evolution or a de-evolution into liking rap that really doesn't have that same real message to it. It's a message that's more geared towards partying, it's more towards drugs, sex, booze, money, things, very materialistic rap. There's very, very little emotion to it, but yet these people, these fans tend to say that they are able to really relate to it, and that's perhaps it's what they have fierce aspiration for. They have aspirations for fame, they have aspirations for money, and for men, they have aspirations for being a ladies' man, and perhaps vice versa. The ladies have a fascination or a desire to really be with some of these more famous popular artists. They find them to be attractive and really find them to be very visually as well as contextually appealing. I don't really see there being too much of a drawback from this. I mean, this is something where this has been a 3-decade-long struggle that these rappers have really gotten to this point with, and I think gravitating toward this is because of the attractiveness of the way in which the music is constructed. It's a very rhythmic fashion, which is something that we've been familiar with ever since the earliest of nursery rhymes whenever we were younger, for one, and for two, this is something that does have a certain amount of rebellion to it. There's a certain amount of basically do whatever the fuck you want to it, and it's definitely one that seems to, especially for the lighter teen and early 20-something youth, has that great appeal of the party lifestyle that perhaps is embodied by the college experience or just by the experience of high school, whatever it may be. There is a certain level of encouragement in there that can be differentiated as just illusion, as metaphor, or as just exactly what it is. What you would wonder, and many people probably do wonder, why so many individuals that end up becoming, convicts or have run-ins with the law have a certain element of popularity. Well, it's because of the whole street cred idea, maybe. I don't really think. But I think really on a musical level, it just has to do with the fact that it is very, very catchy. And you almost have to have a very catchy album in order for it to sell, or really just have something that's so unique, but yet still so accessible to a wide range of audience that it can really sell very, very well. And really, this is a side that I don't have a very large problem with the exception of the Young Money Empire, which has just absolutely no place here just because of how contextually dull and boring that this is. It's to the point where it seems like half of these individuals don't even have interest in what they're doing. And then people like Pitbull, where basically I just... Whenever people shop the store, whenever people decide to pick up a Pitbull album, you almost see this look of disdain on their face if they're not the person that's going to be enjoying the album. Like, why the fuck am I buying this? The Pitbull's kind of like rapping for retards, in my opinion. Regardless to his speed, regardless to his story, I just don't really see what has him, high up on the plank there. For older individuals, it's probably because he's able to sample some older songs, so it's something that's very familiar to them. But at the same time, this is not the blending of the old and new that really is just... I don't know, really, it shouldn't be what drives the man's success. I understand that sampling is very, very large in the rap universe. It's something that happens all the time, but at least with many other artists, we see that done with a little bit more of style, grace, and finesse. Hell, even Eminem on his latest album was able to sample a number of popular songs from different eras, from the 60s all the way up to the 80s, and he's able to really make them not only relevant and really just seem like a fitting backdrop as opposed to the driving force of the song. So that's really, I think, what's up with that. With country music, I really think this has to do with a couple of different things. The first one is definitely upbringing. If you're upbrought in a country listening household, or one that definitely has an affinity for the genre, you are more likely to be heavily exposed to it and probably end up liking it. Secondly, there is definitely an emerging sort of sex appeal with it, and I think this is with the average Joe's crowd and with some of the other individuals, the Aldeans, the Brantley Gilberts of the world, that have that kind of country boy image, but also are able to back it up with a little bit of muscle or hustle or girth. Something that the ladies definitely have a bit of a fixation on. And thirdly, location is certainly something that also drives and dictates this, and this is something that even if you want to argue against it, you have to understand that this does have a modicum of truth to it, because whenever you consider where country music is certainly being purchased at, you have to notice that it's not something you're going to see as often in Los Angeles as you are perhaps in Memphis, or in Atlanta, or in Tallahassee, or even in my small little town outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is also something where you certainly need to have an ear for it, in my belief, and there's also a crossover appeal that has been happening as of late, where a lot of country artists have been able to merge a little bit more with that classic rock ideology, or just that simple, southern rock ideology that was very large in the 1970s and has kind of continued onward throughout the years that have kind of come since then. So there's definitely a bit of an appeal there. So really, this is also something where you don't really need a spyglass and Sherlock Holmes and a Dr. Watson to kind of tell and understand why this is happening. The pop one is a little bit more of one that we need to discuss. Why would pop music be something that's so popular, especially the things that we've seen lately? The Gagas, the Perrys, the Justin Biebers, the One Directions of the world. I mean, every single generation, understandably so, has kind of their little pop fad. We've had New Kids on the Block, we've had NSYNC, the Backstreet Boys, 98 Degrees. Every single generation has certainly had a group that has had sort of that, real appeal to the youth. And these are the individuals where the market is definitely targeted towards. And in years past, this is something where they have been on a lot of television shows. In the 1990s, it was shows such as All That were spotlighting artists such as TLC and Immature. Before that, New Kids on the Block were definitely doing things for television shows, such as, I think Step by Step was the show in which they did the theme song for. I might be wrong. However, they were also everywhere on the earliest versions of MTV and VH1, things like that. They were pushed and hyped very much like a boy band would be. Or like a teen icon would be. Of course, NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys were the same way, only in different ways. They dominated the TRL historical idea of how music has been marketed. Now today, it's something that's marketed and targeted a little bit differently. This is something where there are many, many different outlets that are open and available that kids definitely have access to, and it is something that's being promoted through the children's stations and the like very well, such as Nickelodeon or Disney, depending on who really kind of bred the superstar. And if it's one that was really not one that was from Nickelodeon or Disney, it's one where the hype machine is able to kind of blend with it. That way, it does have a universal appeal for the youth and something where it's very, very available. Now, also because of that, they don't necessarily have to go through those two outlets. Those two have very, very large market abilities, so that is certainly two of the largest chains that they can go through. They can also go through YouTube, which has just a ton of users. You're watching this on YouTube, and this is something where just a couple of years ago, this is completely and totally, it was an impossibility. This was not an avenue or an approach that could be used. Basically, discovering these artists on your computer, on YouTube, or SoundCloud, or one of the other various establishments that are on there, prior to them even becoming the next big thing or a big thing in general. Consider Carly Rae Jepsen. Consider Lorde. Lorde just had made a SoundCloud in 2012, and now she's dominating the charts with her song Royals from a couple of months ago, and she's still selling very, very well. And the album, by the way, Pure Heroin, is just fantastic. It's a really, really good release. But think about the names. Think about the Biebers, the Carly Rae Jepsens, and everything like that. Think about the shows that are out there with the X Factor and American Idol, America's Got Talent, the best dance troupe, the best this, the best that, The Voice. There are avenues literally left and right that can breed this so much easier. And as a result, it also means that a lot of these individuals that may have talent that may be a little bit more tolerable kind of get passed up a little bit because there's just such a wealth of these shows, there's such a wealth of this television that's out there, that it kind of leaves only the most popular and typically the most simplistic ones to really reign supreme. Now also, there is the marketing avenues of the magazine articles, the different press that these bands are able to get. They're really driving that machine, and they're driving it as hard as they can. And this is something where they pop tons of dollars into these different avenues and approaches, and it's definitely something that drives it. But why? Why does this all work? Well, there's a certain level of relatability to some of these songs for the youth, for the younger individuals, those who are perhaps underneath the teenage or have just hit the teenage. And the reason for this is because we all have felt the idea of little crushes and things like that, and we all know that this is something that is going to be a big part of their lives whenever they enter into their teenage years, so it's something that does have a little bit of a relatability to it. These are individuals that are also very clean-cut. These are individuals that have looks for them. These are individuals that also can be seen potentially as role models, and that's the big thing. Since these individuals seem very, very safe, since they are individuals that certainly seem to have a widespread appeal that is certainly family-oriented, this is something where also families and parents can feel a little bit safer knowing that this is what their children are listening to. Grandparents that perhaps are from an older age where that's something that still matters to them and their household can feel a little bit better about getting these things, even though it's just a bona fide hype machine, even though this is just another trend. This is the thing where trends have really kind of gotten out of control over the past couple of years, but parents and grandparents and family members are still willing to really buy into it because A, it does make the children extremely happy for one, and that's something that is very, very important to them. But secondly, it's also the fact that these are all things that they can perhaps recall from their youth, perhaps having, Beatles posters, Beatles figurines, and things like that, because, yeah, you could consider them a teen icon band as well, perhaps one of the first. And perhaps the parents can remember the New Kids on the Blocks, or perhaps if they're newer parents, they remember the NSYNCs and the Backstreet Boys of the world. Now also, We have to remember that this is music that is extremely simplistic. This is something that's not going to necessarily overbear a child. It's not something that's going to necessarily overbear a listener, period. So this is music that, if you need something that's very simple, something that has a very direct approach, something that's very quick, something that's not going to bore them, something that's going to get them dancing, because there does need to be a certain element of danceability to this. A Two Become One by Spice Girls is not going to be as big of a hit right now as it was whenever it came out in the later part of the 1990s. This is something where these groups are all able to give that to the end user. Consider Applause by Lady Gaga. This is something that can get you kind of moving and being retarded whenever the song itself is really, really dumb. It's probably one of the worst songs that I've heard this year, simply because of the real stupidity and the real the simple-mindedness of the topic. And that's pretty much one of the main reasons why I just totally ignored art pop whenever that came out. Now, we also have to remember that this is something that does drive a lot of store sales. This is something that does drive a lot of business for these companies. So companies themselves are going to be willing to hop onto the wagon because they want to make sure that they are riding the coattails of the big thing. It may seem like an evil big business tactic. However, this is something that, at least in the case of stores such as mine, or perhaps even independent stores that want to stay afloat and stay in business and really don't feel as though they're able to do that without being a little bit niche-y, this is certainly one where they're able to become a part of that norm and definitely start to offer some of the products in the different mass media merchandising. And that's probably the final thing. The mass media merchandising literally puts the faces of these individuals everywhere. And this is a tactic that is very, very strategic. This is one that definitely, since they are everywhere, breeds a very one-dimensional philosophy about the group itself. It's something where these individuals are either going to universally love these guys, and it's going to really breed into their mind that they want and need this stuff, or it's going to cause universal bane and hatred, and they're never going to touch it. More often than not, whenever you have a situation like that where it's a light switch effect on whether or not you love something or hate something, there's a good chance that an impulse purchase could arise and occur if you happen to universally love something. And the more interesting things that you see, the more products that you see that you could use in your everyday life, such as tennis shoes, book bags, pencils, folders, sneakers, I already mentioned shoes, even night lights. Hell, I'm surprised they don't make toilet paper, because who wouldn't want to wipe their ass with some of these guys? But you understand my point. Considering there's so much out there, and there's such a wide variety, and their likenesses, the individuals, their likenesses are everywhere, this is something that is extremely recognizable very easily. And if you happen to have somebody in your family that is a universal lover of these individuals, then it's something where they are going to want some of these products, because they want to either maybe deck out their room with them to really show their affection, much like perhaps you did whenever you were younger with whatever teen icon or whatever artist that you were in love with, and etc. Musically, there's very little value to this stuff, though. There is very little value to this musically. It's all prim and proper produced. It's all very simplistically made. This is not necessarily music that requires a grand amount of, intelligence to really make, unless you're getting into some of the artists that are starting to get closer to their 30s, that are trying to branch out a little bit. And in that case, I am actually talking a little bit about the Katy Perrys and the Lady Gagas of the world. Whether or not you choose to agree with that is really up to you, but these are artists that are attempting to branch out just a little bit and kind of do something that's a little bit more mature, and actually kind of expand their musical horizons a little bit, kind of go from one avenue of pop to another one and try to experiment with that. However, you're not going to see that with a teen icon. This is definitely a phase that's going to only go as long as it can, and then once that sound really changes and really gets updated to something a little bit more mature, that's whenever it usually dies down. It's very, very seldom that you see these individuals transition very well into either a solo career, either that, or into a post-hype career. I mean, really, whenever you consider it, One Direction is kind of on the downward side of their initial hype period, because those usually last anywhere between 1 to 3 years. And right now we're in about year number 2. So One Direction has only about 1 good year left until something is going to have to come along and replace them in order for the public to remain, not bored. But as you can see, Justin Bieber is already on his downward trend. It's already something where it has already happened. The last album didn't do it nearly as well as the first two had, and now his new singles are making him sound as more like he's attempting to transition into a Justin Timberlake clone than anything else. Justin Timberlake, by the way, is an individual that is a real good example of a success story out of all of this, where he's been able to transition and really clearly identify his solo career as something different from his career with NSYNC, something a lot more mature, something that is geared more toward an adult audience. And he's been doing extremely well ever since then, as you can probably see. It also helped that whenever he first got the legs on that career, it was whenever there was a time frame where there were not really that many boy and girl groups in the pop scene. He definitely was able to really provide a little bit of a spark to the fire that was perhaps strangely absent aside from little, glam trends such as the Jonas Brothers. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. This is the reason why some of us are driven more toward certain elements of music than others. And funnily enough, the one thing that you perhaps didn't hear come out of my mouth is the simple words of it sounds good. It's what sounds good to me. And this is something that definitely also drives it also. Some individuals just really gravitate towards some of this stuff because it literally does sound great to them. And it should, because it's really meant and marketed to have a very, marketable image to it. It's really meant to have a very prim and properly produced image to it. It's supposed to stick with you. It's supposed to, get stuck in your head, and you're supposed to kind of get lost in it a little bit. And that is something that I will say that even though I am not very happy with where music is right now, that is something that they're doing very, very right at the moment. They're definitely making enough of these catchy little anthems that they're able to stick in the, public's mind for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or, in some cases, even, a year or more. And that's definitely given some artists a big, big boost. But the one thing that I really want to see, the one thing I really would love to see happen, is definitely more of a philosophy where not only does it have to sound good and have an attractive beat, something that you can dance to, but also that it has a message that you can kind of relate to. Those lyrics that you can paint on your walls, either that or, lyrics that are a little bit more fun, but at the same time, they do have some potency. Consider songs such as, Peace of Mind. Consider songs such as More Than a Feeling. And I know I just quoted 2 Boston songs, which isn't exactly tremendously diverse, but consider the 1970s. Consider all of the great songs that we got from that era, and consider the fact that that was also during a very gimmicky period of music, even though there were multiple gimmicks going on at the same time with disco and then the evolution of arena rock. The one thing in the bottom line that I will say about all this, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is all cyclical. So yeah, even though we do tend to gravitate toward certain things over and over again, it is certainly one thing to say that it happens all the time, but it's another thing to understand that it all does happen in a cycle. You have to understand that after a couple years of the boy band hype in the late 1990s, with Hanson, Spice Girls, and everybody like that, all ending with the demise of NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys, then that kind of went away for a little while. It became a little bit more geared toward the individuals, and also a little bit more geared toward the post-90s, post-grunge boom, as they might have called it, or really what I would just call more modern rock boom. And then we kind of went right back to it. And this is something that happens each and every time. With New Kids on the Block, it was something that lasted a very short period of time before grunge became the all-bearing takeover for the couple of years that followed right after that. And then, of course, individuals such as Whitney Houston and what they call New Jack Swing was also very big at that same period of time. In fact, some people may even place New Kids on the Block somewhat on that level, even if it didn't totally apply. So this is something that's cyclical. This is something that will only last a certain period of time, and then the public will gravitate away from it. So just know that if you're kind of trapped in this whole mode where you don't exactly enjoy the fact that this is where we're at, well, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully this has cleared some things up, and hopefully that my credentials have made this sound a little bit more intelligent than it may have if I was just rambling. But if not, leave me a comment, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about this in future videos. So, I'll talk to you guys later.